story I'm going to share with you tonight starts about 10 years ago. I was a very fit and healthy person at the time. I was a runner. I liked to run marathons. And one day when I was doing a breast self-examination, I think is what they call them, I found a tiny lump about the size of a grain of rice and was diagnosed with breast cancer. Within a few days, I went from needles to biopsies to actually scheduling surgery. Breaking the news to my family and friends was a very difficult thing to do, and the hardest telephone call I have ever had to make in my life was to phone home to my mum and to tell her that I had cancer. My mum had multiple sclerosis and was a prisoner of her own wheelchair, and to hear the anguish in my mum's voice was crushing. I learned a whole new language, a language with a new depth and dimension to it. At this time in my life, I began a journal to help capture the thoughts and the confusion that was reigning in my mind. I called it The Enemy Within. I'm going to share some passages from my journal with you tonight. Saying words like biopsy and oncologist was bad enough, but being able to say I have cancer is a whole new ballgame. It was weird, almost what I imagine it's like for an alcoholic to go to an AA meeting for the first time. Hi, my name's Georgie, and I have cancer. I was presented with many options, and I chose to have a lumpectomy with 5 weeks of radiation. And the days all began to roll into one long blur, with decisions and treatment dates and doctor's appointments, explanations to friends and family, and difficult phone calls to make. I didn't have time to question God, and nor did I choose to. But I do remember an overwhelming sense of God's peace throughout each step of this journey. My journal helps remind me of those thoughts during that period. Oh God, I don't understand why I must go through all this, but I am trusting you, and I know that you have never taken me where I could not, with your strength, come through victorious. May you receive honor and praise and glory in the midst of this challenge. Continue to pour your unspeakable peace upon me. I really need to feel your presence through this. God began to speak to me in amazing ways, both through his people and through his word, the Bible. A week after my diagnosis, I went to a ladies' meeting, not dissimilar to what we have tonight. It was being held in a friend's home. And we had a speaker come who I had never met before. She didn't know me. She knew nothing of my circumstances. And I had told very few people that I had started a journal called The Enemy Within. She spoke to us that night from the Psalms. And she talked about how the Psalms can be a pillow of comfort, how we can go to sleep resting in that comfort and the peace of God and wake up rested in that same comfort. And the particular focus of the evening's talk was Psalm 42. And I sat and I listened to her message with hot tears rolling down my cheeks. It was as if God was in that living room with me, and he understood exactly where I was coming and where I was going. And he whispered these words to me from Psalm 42. Yet the Lord will commend his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me, and my prayer unto the God of my life. I will say unto God my rock, why hast thou forsaken me? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? As with a sword in my bones, mine enemies reproach me, while they say daily unto me, where is thy God? Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him, who is the health of my countenance and my God. Those verses have become very special to me through this journey. You see, God knew all about the enemy within. Not only did he know what I was experiencing at that moment, but he knew what was going to happen every day on the journey that I have walked. My journal continues. So at last, surgery day. Thank you, Lord, for your calm, assuring peace. Thank you for the night of rest. Most of all, thank you for the overwhelming support of so many. I am truly moved by the love of God. From those who are very dear and close to me to those who don't even know me, I am being lifted before God's throne each moment of the day. What grace and mercy. The night before my surgery, I was singing in a concert with a group that I sang with, and I had an opportunity to share with the audience my predicament and my next day's events. And afterwards I was overwhelmed at the number of people who came up to me and said, we are praying for you. One woman even said, I will be fasting for you throughout the day, and I know that God will hold you through this surgery. Well, am I scared or fearful? I can honestly say no. It's amazing to me that I am not. And yet why should I be amazed when I am wrapped in a blanket of prayers, when God has promised his presence, and of course when I am in his hands? God has taken me every step of the way, through challenges, sorrows, and joys. And why would that change? He is true to his promise, I will never leave thee or forsake thee. So for the rest of 1992, my life took on a more normal routine. And 1993 rolled around, and it was a good year. I was back into running races, and I accepted the ups and downs of the cancer patient. Every 6 months you have to go to your oncologist just to check how things are going. And there's always that fear and anticipation that things will be okay. And then that massive relief when you come away and you're okay. It looked like the enemy within was defeated, and my journal was going to be a short book. 1994 rolled around, and I decided that with a couple of friends that we would run another marathon. We decided that we would train all through the year and end the year in Honolulu, running the Honolulu Marathon. Life was good. I was sleek and fit, and my two friends didn't have a hope of beating me. Not that there's a competitive bone in my body. I have lots of very good friends. Many of them are here tonight, and several of them are single women. And I'm sure some of you have heard of Lucy Swindoll. This is just a little digression. This is not my story, but this is something I picked up from Lucy Swindoll when she shared. She's a woman in her 60s, a single lady, and she was humorously sharing her favorite Bible verse as a single woman. And I'm sure you're quite familiar with it. Let me share it with you. If any man will come after me, let him. It's kind of getting to that stage. I'm 43, but anyway, it's in God's hands. In the summer of 1994, I got word from a dear friend who had moved down to the States that she was getting married. And we were just delighted to share in this excitement of her life. She was getting married down in Minneapolis, and two friends and I decided that we would drive down to Minneapolis for the weekend. That is not a good thing to do because it's 25 hours driving each way, but anyway, we were, I guess, younger and foolish back then. On the way back from the wedding, we'd had a great time of fellowship and friendship and celebrated the great day with our friend Debbie. And on the way back, I was driving. My two friends were dozing in the car. And at one point, I just reached across and felt a hard lump underneath my left armpit. And a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach came over. I was so dismayed at the time, I had to pull over the car and ask one of my friends to drive. Let my journal continue with the story. Well, I didn't think I would be writing in this journal too much more, but here we go again. On the way home from Debbie and Tim's wedding, I discovered a hard lump, bigger than the first time, under my left arm. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. I even had to stop the car and ask Aileen to drive. My regular 6-month checkup was to be scheduled for the next Thursday, so there wasn't any need to try to get in to see anyone sooner. At my checkup, we found a chain of lumps. We also did extensive and terribly painful mammograms. Another mass showed up at the end of the scar site from the first surgery. This did not feel good. I ended up having more extensive lumpectomy surgery, and all of the lumps that were removed were cancer. In fact, all of the tissue to the periphery showed signs of cancer. The next and only option that I was faced with at this time was a mastectomy. I had a wonderful team of doctors who guided me through the decisions that I needed to make at the time. And I opted to have reconstructive surgery at the same time as the mastectomy. We were going to use my own abdominal tissue, or as much as they could get, because I was the lean, mean running machine. And they would use whatever tissue they could find to reconstruct a breast. This was all happening in October of 1994. And at this point, I had already run about 600 miles in training for the Honolulu Marathon. And the prospect of this is probably an odd thing for non-runners to understand, but the prospect of not being able to complete the task that I had set my mind to was almost worse than the recurrence itself. But because of the procedure that I had opted for, it required a surgery time of about 10 to 12 hours and a team of 3 surgeons. It was going to take some scheduling before we could get that scheduled into the hospital, so it would be several weeks before I could have surgery. But in consultation with my doctors, they all agreed that I could continue running in a limited fashion and that I could go to Honolulu and run my race, and my surgery was scheduled for the day after I got back from Hawaii. See, God was working out the details in my life. He knew how important this race had become for me. It was almost as if this marathon represented the challenge of life that I was facing right then. If I could get through those 26 miles in 80-degree temperatures, I knew that surgery would be a breeze. And I'd probably have a good tan line as well. But I came across an entry in my journal that was written just a few days before the marathon. It's only 4 days left before the marathon. Each time I run, I am choking back tears. Tears of fear, anticipation, accomplishment, of attaining personal goals. I'm not sure which. I do know that when I cross that finish line, there will be floods of tears, and there will be no one there who knows me and can just hold me while I sob. I think the biggest reason I'll cry is that this is one more hurdle overcome, with the next big challenge just around the corner. It feels like I will be a whole person for just one more week. Then my body will be marred and mutilated. It's like damaged goods. I spent Christmas in the hospital, and my surgery was very successful. My sister, who is here visiting from England, came with her youngest son to help me through the recuperation. And as children would have it be, my young 8-year-old nephew at the time provided one of those classic embarrassing moments. You see, my surgery had taken a huge elliptical piece from my abdomen, so I had a 17-inch semicircular scar from hip to hip. What I didn't realize at the time is that I would lose my belly button. But my plastic surgeon gave me a nice new belly button as well. So I got 2-for-1 deal in the process. And I needed to recuperate by lying on the couch for several weeks, just helping the wound to heal. And I would have my tummy exposed. And my little 8-year-old nephew, who would be embarrassed to death if he knew I was sharing this with so many women, he came over and looked at my tummy, which did look quite gruesome. And to make it a little less scary, I said to him one day, "Hey, doesn't it look like a happy face?" And he looked at me, and he got this puzzled look on his face, and he said, "But Auntie Georgie, where are the eyes?" So we quickly changed the subject and moved on. In 1995, it had started a little differently than I expected, but nevertheless I had received excellent medical care, and I was ready to move on yet again, confident in God's sustaining grace and the strength and the comfort that He can provide. I'd love to tell you that this was the end of my journey with cancer, but unfortunately it was not. Let me read my journal. In May, I went home to England for 2 weeks holiday, just to let everyone know I was doing okay and had recuperated from surgery completely. Throughout the month, I was having back pain and thought it was overcompensation of the back muscles because of the weaker abdominal area. I didn't think too seriously about this, but I had discovered a tiny lump near my right collarbone, and to be safe, went to my GP and then to my surgeon. He thought we should remove it and biopsy it to be sure. So on May 19th, almost 3 years to the day that my journal started, I went for the biopsy. I went alone this time. I waited in the emergency waiting area for the results. I saw Dr. McKinnon and he motioned to me. There were no quiet rooms available, so we sat on a bench and he said, "It's more of the same," and that he was concerned about my back pain, that we needed to do a bone scan to be sure. Sherry took me for the bone scan. Following the scan, they sent me for more tests and x-rays, and the pain in my back was excruciating at times. On Tuesday evening, I had collapsed in my own living room. On Wednesday, I collapsed in the x-ray department trying to put weight on my back and legs. When Dr. Geggy looked at the scans and x-rays, he came and told Sherry and I that it had spread to my bones. We went and looked at the images ourselves. We looked at the images of my entire skeleton and saw many areas of blackness that represented the cancerous cells. It had spread to my spine, my sternum, my neck, my shoulders. This was a very hard week for me. I called it my Black Week. I found it overwhelming to be facing this ongoing challenge when I thought I had come through the worst of it. I thought that we would be closing the book, or at least the chapter, and moving on. There's a very moving book called Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl. He was a medical professional who was captured during World War II and imprisoned in a Nazi war camp. And there are many sections in this book that I could read to you tonight, but in view of the darkness I was facing at this time, I've chosen this passage. Frankel is out working on a road, clearing it of ice in the early hours of the morning. He's clearing the road of ice for the Nazi vehicles to pass over the road, and the soldiers are watching him. I was struggling to find the reason for my sufferings, my slow dying. In a last violent protest against the hopelessness of imminent death, I sensed my spirit piercing through the enveloping gloom. I felt it transcend that hopeless, meaningless world, and from somewhere I heard a victorious yes in answer to my question of the existence of an ultimate purpose. At that moment, a light was lit in a distant farmhouse which stood on the horizon as if painted there, in the midst of the miserable grey of a dawning morning in Bavaria. Et lux in tenebris lucet, and the light shineth in the darkness. For hours I stood hacking at the icy ground. The guard passed me by, insulting me, and once again I communed with my beloved. I read many books at this time on suffering, and I came across an old poem in a book that's now out of print. The poem is entitled Darkness. In faithfulness hast thou afflicted me, O sovereign love. I will not fear, but look in faith to thee enthroned above, and know my Father's heart of grace has planned this darkness that I cannot understand. I rest in thee, though human tears may fall in sorrow's hour. Upon thy faithfulness I cast my all and claim thy power to work eternal wealth of holy gain from this deep night of loneliness and pain. In faithfulness hast thou afflicted me, most gracious one. In faithfulness may I accept from thee this thou hast done. For thou thy gifts of darkness dost impart, but to disclose the fullness of thy heart. How does darkness disclose the fullness of God's heart? It's in our darkest hour that the light of God's love can shine the brightest. We can see his image ever clearer. And because of the darkness, our focus is drawn to the light, just as in the darkness here your eyes are pulled to the candles on your table. From another book on suffering, I read these words. Watch where God puts you in darkness, and when you are there, keep your mouth shut. Darkness is the time to listen and heed. If you talk to other people, you cannot hear what God is saying. When you are in the dark, listen, and God will give you a very precious message for someone else when you get into the light. God was giving me a special message of hope to share with other people. What a wonderful opportunity for me to experience and to tell others of the relationship I have with Jesus Christ, God's Son. The more that I have traveled this journey with cancer, the more God has brought people into my life who are dealing with similar situations. People who need a word of comfort or encouragement, or just a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 34, it reads, Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. I am so thankful for the opportunities that God brings my way of sharing his comfort with other people. He has taught me to see people with different eyes, to see their hurts and to feel their pain. Well, lest I keep you here all night with the details of my journey with cancer, let me just speed up a few things and bring you more up to date. I was treated with medication that brought on hemorrhaging, that revealed tumors in my uterus and ovaries. I had immediate surgery. In 1998, I had to have more chemotherapy because of the spread of the disease. There was an egg-sized tumor in my right thigh that was causing some risk of a fracture in the bone, that I had more radiation. And the bone tumors have just continued to advance and spread throughout my body. Sometimes very painful periods requiring many painkillers to function, and more radiation to bring the pain under control. Periods where I didn't think I would live the next 6 months. But God has always brought me through with his comfort and with his peace. And his word continues to bring solace to my soul. In Psalm 94, it reads, Unless the Lord had given me help, I would soon have dwelt in the silence of death. When I said, my foot is slipping, your love, O Lord, supported me. When anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought joy to my soul. In April of this year, I discovered that the cancer has spread to my liver, and I'm currently on my 6th regime of chemotherapy, and this course is going till the end of October. These last few months I've been focusing more on what are the purposes of God. It's difficult when this journey continues to take me down roads that I would rather not travel. What does it all mean? What is the purpose of God in my life? Oswald Chambers, in My Utmost for His Highest, on one of the particular days, he is talking about the occasion where the disciples are out on the Sea of Galilee and a treacherous storm works itself into a rage, and Jesus is not with them at the time, but Jesus walks out across the water. Oswald Chambers says, "What is my vision of God's purpose for me? Whatever it may be, His purpose is for me to depend on Him and on His power now. If I can stay calm, faithful, and unconfused while in the middle of the turmoil of life, the goal of the purpose of God is being accomplished in me. God is not working towards a particular finish. His purpose is the process itself. What He desires for me is that I see Him walking on the water, with no shore, no success, no goal in sight, but simply having the absolute certainty that everything is all right because I see Him walking on the sea. It is the process, not the outcome, that is glorifying to God." There's another book written by a man I have earlier quoted, Larry Crabb. He wrote, "Hope When You're Hurting." And he again deals with the whole concept of what is our hope, what is our purpose. So what is our hope? Simply this, that nothing, no problem in our circumstances or in our souls can keep us from living out God's purpose for our lives if we are abandoned to Him. If cancer blocks that purpose, it will be removed. If depression gets in the way, it will lift. If fatigue from poor sleep keeps us from fulfilling God's agenda, we'll snore with the best of them. If wealth is a part of the plan, we'll close the big deal. But when illness, discouragement, prodigal children, insomnia, and money struggles are useful to God in advancing His purposes, they will be a part of our lives. We are not wrong to take whatever honorable measures we can to alleviate our suffering, and we are not wrong to thank God if things improve. But because we cannot always understand what God is up to, we are wrong to demand less suffering, to make it our top priority to change things to be the way we would like. May 1992 is such a long time away. It seems like such a long time ago. And God has taught me many things since then, and my journey continues. There is an interesting little quote from a book by C.S. Lewis. It's from the Chronicles of Narnia, and it's the Prince Caspian book. And there's a little conversation between one of the main characters, Lucy, and Aslan the lion. And Aslan is a figure of God in this book. It simply says, "Aslan," said Lucy, "you're bigger." "That is because you are older, little one," answered he. "Not because you are." "I am not, but every year you grow, you will find me bigger." I can honestly say that through my journey with cancer, my God is definitely bigger. You may wonder, why did God allow this to happen to one of His children? What did I do to deserve this? And how can I possibly continue to trust God when my life has gotten so complicated and challenging? Well, I don't really have answers to the first two questions, but I do have an answer for the third one. How can I not trust Him? No matter what comes our way, God has promised me that He will be with me. I believe His word, the Bible, and over the years that I have known God and developed an ongoing relationship with His Son, Jesus Christ, He's revealed so much to me about His loving character. You might have expected me to get bitter or angry or shake my fist at God, but I don't see it that way. I haven't questioned Him, nor have I shook my fist at Him. Instead, it has been a marvelous experience for me to know more of the grace and the mercy of God. I've come to thank God for every single day, for what He allows me to accomplish in that time. And I am more aware of the things that really matter. They are people and the relationships that we can share together. And of course, the eternal relationship that I can share and that you too can share with Jesus Christ. I may die of cancer. I may not, but I will eventually die. And I have a choice in where I will spend eternity, in the presence of a loving God or away from his grace and goodness and mercy. You too have a choice. You may not have cancer, but you will eventually die. And you have a choice in what you will do with Jesus Christ and the offer he extends to you to forgive you and to give you the joy of being in his presence for eternity. You have your own enemy within. Now, when I've shared my story like this in other places, sometimes people get angry with me, or sometimes they expect me to speak more of a hope for a cure for cancer. Believe me, I do hope there is a cure for cancer. I lost a friend to cancer on Monday. And there is just too much cancer around. And I'm sure many of you have lives that are touched by cancer. But it's not cancer that is the biggest issue at this time. When we choose to work through the difficult issues of life, cancer brought me face to face with my own mortality. And as we deal with those more challenging issues of life, we can experience a peace that nothing will shake. So the most important issue is not living with cancer or possibly dying with cancer, but death itself. Which brings me to the second thorny experience of my life. On February the 13th, 1998, my mum's birthday, I received a phone call from England telling me my mum had just gone into a respite home for a week's vacation that was specially designed for multiple sclerosis patients. But on that particular day, she had aspirated some soup into her lungs, and the voice on the end of the phone told me that they did not expect her to live through the night. And a frantic panic overtook me at the thought of never seeing my mum alive again. And I made all those immediate plans to be on the next plane out of Calgary, and it was the longest 9-hour flight of my life. The minute-by-minute anguish, not knowing if I would see my mum alive or dead. And muffled sobs accompanied me across the Atlantic. All my siblings dropped everything and also traveled to the town where Mum was staying. She was still alive when we all got there. And so began the round-the-clock vigil at her bedside with all 5 of her children present. The doctors were wrong. My mum lived another 4 weeks. There were many ups and downs during those times and many 24-hour sleepless days. Multiple sclerosis is a horrible disease. What was happening to my mum was confusion was reigning between the functions of her body, whether to swallow or to breathe, and to almost watch as my mum at times looked like she was suffocating. As I sat and watched a loved one die, my mind was numb, and my emotions were stretched to the raw. My heart and soul were pleading with God to draw my mum to himself. See, my mum was not a Christian. In fact, at times in her life, I'm sure she shook her fist at God. But faced with the chasm of death, she fought valiantly in her own strength. But eventually she admitted her own fears. I remember in the quietness and the darkness of one night, I was sitting by my mum's bed and just listening to her struggled breathing and seeing fear and pain in her eyes. My mum turned her head to me and she said, "Georgie, I am scared." I knew how hard that was for my mum to admit, and I asked her if she would like me to pray with her. And I prayed, asking for God's peace. My brother-in-law would read scripture, as many of us would, to my mum at that time. And on one particular day, he was reading about the thief on the cross as Christ was dying for each one of us, and the thief, who was also facing imminent death, turned to Jesus and believed in who he was, the very Son of God, the Savior of mankind. And my brother-in-law said to my mum, "Do you believe like the thief on the cross?" And my mum said yes. What a display of God's grace and mercy. He allowed my mom to live 4 weeks longer so that my mom would experience the joy of knowing Jesus. Through those days of waiting for death to come, I often thought about what my own death would be like. What would the other side of death be like? I questioned my faith to the core. All those evangelical cliches that we cling to, did they ring true? Was I believing a lie, a facade? What difference did it make that Jesus Christ lived and died on a cross 2,000